So we are in Zechariah chapter 2, and today we'll be looking at verses 6 through 9. So we're sort of chopping up this third vision a little bit because there's so much stuff in here. We're continuing with this. I said second vision in here, but it's actually the third night vision. Last week we looked at the first part, and what did we see in the first part? Yeah, who was that man with the measuring cord that was measuring Jerusalem? Yeah, pre-incarnate Christ, right? Pre-incarnate Jesus. Let me ask you this then. Do you remember why that was significant? Why was it significant that we have this vision with the pre-incarnate Christ measuring Jerusalem? What is it about the fact that he's measuring Jerusalem that's significant? Do you remember? Jake, do you remember? So the thing that was significant about that is that it's an even more detailed reminder of God's promise to rebuild Jerusalem. We look at some of the other prophets. I think we looked at possibly Isaiah and Jeremiah about how Jerusalem would be rebuilt. Remember, the city without walls. We'd have all the people, all the cattle. But here in Zechariah, we're getting even more information about this promise to rebuild. And as we move on to verse 6, we see even more details of the vision. So let's look at chapter 2, verses 6 through 9. So somebody read those verses for me. All right, Avery, go ahead. Okay, all right, good. Now, an important thing to realize about the Israelites is to understand what was expected of them in the way they lived their lives. Do you remember what God expected of them? In what way? In what way? What kind of words did we use? Do you remember? I'm pretty sure we talked about this. Maybe we didn't. Maybe I'm confusing many of the other things that I've talked about. I'll just tell you, God commanded them to remain devoted to him, but to remain pure and undefiled, right? Pure and undefiled. Those are two big words. And everything that goes against God's commands is something that would defile them. So, since we like to flip around, let me get one person to turn to Leviticus 20, 22 through 26, and then one person turn to Deuteronomy 20, 17, and 18. And Deuteronomy 20, 17, and 18. In Leviticus chapter 20. Okay, go ahead and read that one. Chapter 20. 20, 17, and 18. That's 22 through 26. Okay, good. And now, Jake, King James us with Deuteronomy 20:17 and 18. All right, thank you very much. Deuteronomy 20:17 and 18. So God placed a great value on his people not being defiled through their interactions with other people, because we saw that actually in the verse in Leviticus, that he kept them separate from other peoples. But then there's all kinds of other things that would make them defiled. So God is placing a premium on not having them interact or be spoiled by these outside influences. However, once they were conquered and in the Babylonian Empire, they were in constant contact with these people, people of other nations, idolatrous and immoral cultures, and not everyone was strong enough to resist this pressure and temptation. So now, I think we've already talked about this a little bit. Who is an example of someone who did remain pure in the Babylonian culture when they were captive? Go ahead and shout it out, whoever. And Daniel. It's not often that someone has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego first before Daniel. But yeah, so yeah. Daniel's the main one I was thinking of. Daniel's someone who's a great example of faithfulness to God's laws, despite being in a position of being a prisoner in Babylon. So he was captive, he was being held prisoner, but he still remained true to God. All right, so the next section of verses in this vision relates back to verses 1 through 5, obviously, as those were the ones that we just saw previously. And what those verses will do in all of the Israelite, or what am I saying here? What those verses will do in all the Israelites to respond properly to what's promised to them. So it helps remind them of this. So let's turn our attention to verses 6 or 7 first. So we got to break this up a little bit. Let's see, we read those already. So I'll read 6 and 7. Ho there, flee from the land of the north, declares Yahweh. For I have dispersed you as the four winds of the heavens, declared Yahweh. Woe Zion, escape, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. Now, this may be pretty obvious, but what's the first thing you notice about verse 6? What's something weird? Yeah, ho there. What is does the King James translation say that too? What does it say in verse 6? Zechariah 2:6. Yes. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have mentioned it. Okay. So it still says that. So what do you think is meant by that phrase, or why is it used? Why did he say ho there, or ho, ho, or whatever we have in our translations? Yeah. I mean, it's a warning. A lot of times stuff like that's used to get attention. So MacArthur says this phrase, it is fundamentally a cry of intense urgency that can express deep grief or passionate longing. So it's essentially, like you said, it's a call for attention to what is about to be said. So what comes next? What's the next thing that's said? Flee from the land of the north. What do you think he means by that? Okay, all right. What he's telling them is to leave Babylon. So they're rebuilding the city of Jerusalem at this point, right? So that means the captivity is over, but not everybody is leaving. Because again, some of these people have probably started to identify with this culture. They may have intermarried. They just may be more attached to it now. So again, he's telling them to leave Babylon, to get themselves out of these pagan and idolatrous cultures. Now, I want to look briefly at what Isaiah 48:20 says. Let's see, Isaiah 48:20. Go forth from Babylon, free from the Chaldeans, declare with the sound of joyful shouting, cause this to be heard, bring it forth to the end of the earth. Say, Yahweh has redeemed his servant Jacob. Now, this call to them was made about 200 years earlier. And once again, the call is put out to Israel to separate themselves, to leave, to get out of Babylon. And just to further explain the use of that particular phrase, the land of the north, Babylon is referred to as the land of the north. Do you have any idea why? I mean, other than the fact that... Okay. Yeah. When Nebuchadnezzar's armies invaded the city, they did it by coming down from the north. So that's just why we're sort of referring to Babylon as the land of the north. And God also mentions that he dispersed the Israelites. And what does that mean, that they were dispersed? They're spread out all over the place. Again, that's not a special biblical word, although the concept is there, but it means they were scattered into a lot of different places. And the words, the four winds of heaven, just speaks to exactly how far they had been dispersed and how spread out they actually were, spread out over a large area. So MacArthur, again, he says this: the phrase four winds of heaven also depicted the instability and violence of that time. Now we see the use of this phrase in Daniel 8:8 and Daniel 11:4. Yeah, that's okay. Daniel 8:8 and 11:4. I just want to point out that we see this idea of the four winds of heaven mentioned. Because there's something, this verse 8:8, it says, then the male goat magnified itself exceedingly. Again, this is part of the vision of the ram and the goat. But as soon as it was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven, meaning they're all spread out. Jake, you want to read Daniel 11:4? Yeah, and you can just read the first part. Yeah, so again, this idea is there, and it just means that everything that is sent to the four winds of heaven is going to be dispersed. It's going to be spread out. And the fact that they were dispersed was a punishment. So this means that they shouldn't want to stay where they are, especially now that God is calling him back. So that's what we're seeing in verse 6. Now in verse 7, he says, woe Zion. And this use of the term Zion is another reminder to the people of Israel of what they should be. You know what that reference is, what that word means when we're using the word Zion? Is that in the King James too? Does it say Zion in verse 7? Okay. Well, there's a few different meanings for it, but the use that we see here is related to the city of Jerusalem. And obviously that's because they weren't all there. So this statement or this use of Zion probably would have hit them in kind of an interesting way. And that's why this serves as another reminder to them. It's reminding them who they are while God is calling them back. So again, this is particularly to let them know that some of them need to stop doing what they're doing and they need to come back to God. Now, in case they weren't clear, Yahweh calls them, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. Woe Zion, escape, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. What do you think he's trying to emphasize when he says this? Yeah. Yeah. It's just, again, I think this is probably a lot about people getting comfortable in this culture. Again, it's a call for the Jews who had not yet returned from exile. The exile was not within their control, but when that captivity was over, the fact that they could return to Jerusalem was within their control. So this is yet another reminder. We see this over and over, even in just these two verses, that God is reminding them that they are to be separate from these people. And this is a call that is even continued into the New Testament. Now, let's go to Corinthians, and let me see which one we have here. Yes. Who wants to read 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 16? Okay. 2 Corinthians. Six, 14 through 16. Okay, so we see that, not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. We can't have harmony with them. They have this idea of God dwelling with his people. Now, this concept moves farther beyond this, all the way into Revelation, particularly Revelation 18:4. Now, chapter 18 of Revelation is talking about Babylon. So somebody read me 18:4. Revelation 18:4. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues." So again, this call, this idea of calling God's people back goes throughout not just the Old Testament, but the New Testament. Now, once again, just a reminder, part of the reason that we are looking at Zechariah is because understanding Zechariah is going to be key to understanding Revelation, because there's a tremendous amount of overlap here. So that's verses 6 and 7. So now as we move ahead to verses 8 and 9, we get something of an explanation here as to why the Israelites should respond to the call that he is making to them to flee from the land of the north and to return from Babylon. So in verses 8 and 9, we have this: "For thus says Yahweh of hosts, after glory he has sent me against the nations which have taken you as a spoil. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will wave my hand over them, so they will be the spoil for their slaves. Then you will know that Yahweh of hosts has sent me." Okay, so let's look at these verses. What does Yahweh of hosts say that's a little bit confusing? What does he say there in verse 8? Okay, but look at those words right there. "Thus says Yahweh of hosts, after glory he has sent me." So, and you might notice that the "he" is capitalized. Yeah, how can God send himself? So what concept, what biblical concept do we need to understand in order to make sense of this? Yes, the doctrine of the Trinity, right. God is 3 in 1. So the idea of Trinity is something that's essential to our understanding of this. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense for God to say about himself that after glory, he has sent me against the nations. Now, let's turn back again. Jake, keep your finger in Zechariah, because we're going to go back there after we do this. Okay, good. Yeah, and let's look at Isaiah 61:1. and then we're going to go into the New Testament. Isaiah 61:1. Does anybody want to read this one, 61:1? Where's your Bible, Avery? The Pew Bible. Go ahead, Jake. Okay. It says, so the Spirit of Lord Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to captives and freedom to prisoners. Now, who's speaking there? Who specifically? No. Avery. Okay, but so this is Jesus speaking here in that verse specifically. Now, how do we know that? Well, I'll tell you. The key to interpreting this is to look at Luke chapter 4, verse 18. So in case I've never said it before, this is why we have to, begin to have a understanding of our whole Bible. Luke 4:18. Now what's happening here is Jesus is in the synagogue and he's standing up to do the reading in the synagogue, and this is what he reads. He reads, "For the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to reclaim the favorable year of the Lord." So Jesus, in reading this passage in the synagogue, is telling us that this is him speaking. And we see all the persons of the Trinity mentioned here. And again, it's also the same language that we see here once we get to Zechariah. So we take this as a confirmation that Yahweh sent who to do this? Jesus. Yahweh sent the Messiah, as the Israelites would understood it. So we see that the Messiah was sent against the nations that have taken you as spoil, or to punish them who persecuted Israel. So we see Israel referred to as the apple of God's eye also in Psalm 17:8. Avery, read me Psalm 17:8. I know, gotta flip back. Psalm 17:8. But you're not going to read it. Nope, 17. 17:8. Okay, keep me as the apple of your eye, hide me in the shadow of your wings. What do you think what is the apple of someone's eye? Okay. Yeah, and I mean, you can even think of like the pupil as being the apple of your eye, the center of your eye. So what these nations are doing, those that persecute Israel, they're basically poking God in the eye. And if somebody poked you in the eye, what does that mean you're going to want to do? It's going to make you mad, right? So even though we know this morning that you're not supposed to do that, you're not supposed to enact your own vengeance, it's still going to make you mad. But they're provoking God's wrath as well here by poking him in the eye. So from here, after that point, we have a very significant promise that he will have his hand over them and make them spoil for their slaves. What do you think that means? I will wave my hand over them so that they will be spoil for their slaves. What does that mean? Again. But the whole thing. What else? How is it they're going to become spoil for their own slaves? Yeah, It means that God will use his mighty hand. And that phrase, this mighty hand, I will wave my hand over them, his mighty hand is something that's been used to demonstrate his power in all kinds of other places, all kinds of other circumstances. And the fact that God's hand is so powerful means that the results will be so dramatic that the tables will completely turn, right? So the people that were slaves will now be above those who were keeping them as slaves, because this is the power that God has. So what we have here is another very significant and another very comforting promise from God for his people. And again, this is going to be the work of the Messiah, and this is how they will know that God sent him. Now, going back to concepts that even this early in the text we've already looked at on multiple occasions, God is using Zechariah the prophet to ensure his people that he's not forgotten them. So again, this is what everything, or just about everything at least, has been about so far. So what are the people to know from this? They're to know, I have three things as usual. One, that God has not abandoned his people. Two, God's plan has never changed and will never change. And three, this one's a little different. So we have one, God has not abandoned his people. Two, God's plan is not changed and will never change. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, write that down. Because then I have a third one that is a little different than what we've talked about so far. Actually, yeah, it's something along those lines. Just know that God's plan has never changed and it's never going to change. If you consider these four verses that we looked at, especially the first two, like 6 and 7, what is God doing here? What is he doing? Yeah, but even more basic than that. Point number 3 is that God is actively calling his people to him. God is actively calling his people to him. So that one, like I said, it's a little different. This is something that we haven't seen yet in these visions. But this last point is important for all of us as well. So this last point is very significant to the Israelites who are hearing this prophecy from Zechariah. But it's important for us because Christians are God's people as well. And there are verses in the Bible that suggest that we're exiles in the world too. So one of those places is 1 Peter 1. And we see the way that he opens up this letter. 1 Peter 1. What does he call them? To those who reside as exiles, scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who are chosen. So we see that the Christians here he addresses are referred to as exiles. Now, this really does go along with some of the stuff that we've been talking about on Sunday morning in the main service. But we're similarly in the middle of a pagan world. We're similarly in the midst of people that have different beliefs, different lifestyles that are actively in opposition to God. So we find ourselves there as well. But we also have to remind ourselves that we're called to be different. Does anybody remember a verse that we talk about all the time? Something in the Beatitudes that tells us this? What are we to be, Avery? What does it say? What are we to be in the world? Two things. Yeah. Salt and light. That's right. So that's good. Avery, you were right. You were almost there. It's Matthew 5, 13 and 14. What is God using to call us? The Bible. That's exactly right. God is using the Bible to call us in the same way that he used prophets like Zechariah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all of these other guys. God is using his word. He's using all of Scripture to remind us of our calling, that we need to be pure. We need to separate ourselves, not physically separate ourselves necessarily, but in our lifestyle, in the way that we do things, in the way that we behave, in the way that we talk, we need to separate ourselves and be pure. And again, Scripture reminds us of that, but in the same way, we're heeding that call because we also need to remember that God's eternal promises for us are there as well. So he is calling us to do this because he's calling us out into the promises that he has for us for all eternity. So those are the things that we want to take away from this today. So